Two men were stabbed to death on a street corner in Atlanta. There were dozens of people within a few feet of it happening. The whole thing was over in about 90 seconds, and 25 years later, nobody has ever been convicted of killing them. That part alone would make this a strange case, but here's what makes it one of the most argued about crimes in American sports history. One of the men charged with those murders went on to become one of the most famous football players who ever lived, a first-ballot Hall of Famer, a Super Bowl MVP, won, by the way, almost exactly 1 year to the day after he sat in a jail cell facing the death penalty. His name is Ray Lewis. And depending on who you ask, he was either a terrified bystander who got swept up in something he tried to stop, or a man who knows exactly what happened that night and has spent a quarter of a century making sure nobody else ever will. The two men who died were named Richard Lawler and Jacinth Baker. They are the part of this story that usually gets lost, so let's start there. Before we dive deeper into the case, I've got something pretty cool to show you. And if you stick around for 10 seconds, there's $10 in it for you. Literally. So, you know how you're already on your phone half the day, scrolling, waiting around between things? Turns out you can make real money doing it. That's free cash, and it's what I've been using lately to pick up a bit on the side. It's free, it's simple. You complete quick tasks, surveys, trying out mobile games, and you get paid. I went with Idle Bank Tycoon here because it gives great rewards and looks fun. You just start the offer and the rewards stack up as you play. One thing, make sure you enable app tracking when it asks, otherwise you don't get credited properly. And it's legit too. 4.7 stars on Trustpilot and a huge community of people all doing the same thing. The best part is you can do it while you're doing nothing else. Watching TV, commuting, standing in line. Here's where I'm at after a couple days. The thing that actually sold me, most sites make you grind to $100 before you can cash out. Free cash lets you withdraw at 25 and it's instant. PayPal, Amazon gift cards, whatever works. So sign up through my link or scan the code on screen and you get an extra $10 on your first offer. Links in the description and pinned comments too. I'll check back in a few days to show you how much I've pulled in. Now, back to the case. Richard Lawler was 24. He was a barber from Akron, Ohio, the oldest of 9 siblings, and by every account, the kind of person other people organized their lives around. His younger brother, Handsome Lawler, put it simply, "He was my father and my big brother at the same time." Richard had learned to cut hair as a kid, gone to barber college, and built a real reputation for it. He loved clothes, loved fashion, and he was about to become a dad. His fiancée, Kelly Smith, was pregnant. Their daughter would be born roughly a month after he was killed. She never met him. Jacinth Baker was 21. Everyone called him Shorty. He was about 5'3". He was an artist, a painter. He and Richard had been friends since childhood, back in Akron, and they'd both come south chasing the same thing a lot of people were chasing in Atlanta in the late 90s. Better work, a bigger life, a fresh start. Baker had lost both his parents young and was partly raised by his grandmother. Two young men from Ohio in Atlanta, out celebrating on the biggest party night of the year. That's who they were before any of this. The other side of the street. Now the other group. Ray Lewis was 24, same age as Richard Lawler. He was already a star, a Pro Bowl linebacker for the Baltimore Ravens, the league's leading tackler that season. His team wasn't even in the Super Bowl. He'd come to Atlanta purely for the festivities, riding around in a rented stretch limousine with an entourage of about 10 people. Two of those people matter a lot. Reginald Oakley, 31, an acquaintance Lewis knew out of Baltimore, and Joseph Sweeting, 34, a longtime friend from the Miami area. Sweeting had a criminal record stretching back to the mid-80s. Hold on to both of those names. They're the two men who'd eventually stand trial for murder. And here's a detail that becomes important later. 2 days before the Super Bowl, Sweeting bought knives at a sporting goods store in a mall outside Atlanta. By Lewis's own later account, he wasn't the only one. Oakley and another man in the group, Kwame King, picked up knives too. One of them was a serrated 7-inch hunting knife built for gutting animals. So this group rolled into the night with blades already on them. Remember that. Super Bowl Sunday. January 30th, 2000. The St. Louis Rams beat the Tennessee Titans 23-16 at the Georgia Dome. A famous game in its own right, decided on the final play. But that's not our story. Our story happens after the stadium empties out, when the whole city pours into Buckhead, Atlanta's upscale nightlife district, to keep the party going. Lewis and his group ended up at a club called the Cobalt Lounge. Lawler and Baker were out in the same district that night. At some point, the two groups crossed paths, and there was friction. Words inside, words spilling out into the street. Nothing that had to turn into anything. But it was around 4 in the morning. The clubs were emptying, everybody had been drinking, and hundreds of people were milling around on the same stretch of pavement. What happened next happened fast. The trash talk escalated as the groups passed each other again near Lewis's limo. And then the established trigger, the one nobody really disputes, is this. Jacinth Baker smashed Reginald Oakley over the head with a champagne bottle. After that, in Lewis's words, all hell broke loose. Two larger men grabbed Sweeting and dragged him toward a tree. Oakley was throwing punches. People were swinging in the dark. And somewhere inside that scrum, both Lawler and Baker were stabbed. Baker in the heart, Lawler stabbed multiple times, with wounds straight through the heart. The medical examiner would later say these weren't wild, flailing slashes. They were aimed. Whoever did it, in his assessment, knew what they were doing. Both men staggered, then collapsed about 200 yards from the club. They bled to death on the street. The whole eruption, start to finish, lasted roughly a minute and a half. The limo. Lewis and around 10 people piled into the rented Lincoln and took off. As they pulled away, a man from the Ohio group opened fire on the limo, hitting the body, flattening a tire. He later said he was trying to stop the people who just hurt his friends. Inside that limo, 2 things happened that would define the entire case. First, Lewis told everyone in the car to keep their mouths shut. A witness said he heard Lewis say he wasn't trying to end his career like this. Second, the limo was later found with Jacinth Baker's blood inside it, including near where Lewis had been sitting. And then there's the suit. Lewis had been wearing a white or cream-colored outfit that night. A witness later described a passenger dumping a white hotel laundry bag into a dumpster outside a fast food restaurant. That suit was never seen again. It has never been recovered. 25 years later, the victims' families still ask about it. The arrests. Police moved quickly, maybe too quickly, as we'll see. Lewis gave a statement that he later admitted was misleading. At one point, he wouldn't even name the people in his own limo and referred to Oakley by a false name. He was arrested, and just 11 days after the killings, a grand jury indicted all 3 men, Lewis, Oakley, and Sweeting, on murder charges. Sweeting was charged in Lawler's death, Oakley in Baker's. Lewis posted $1 million bond and was released. The mayor of Atlanta stood at the press conference and declared the city would not let wealth or fame pervert justice. Strong words. The problem was that the case behind those words was already full of holes. It was the Ohio group's own fault, pure self-defense. This is the theory that actually won in court, so it's worth taking seriously. The argument goes, Baker started the violence by cracking Oakley with a bottle. Lewis's group was outnumbered and getting jumped. Whatever happened next was men defending themselves in a chaotic fight they didn't start. The defense leaned on this hard, and the jury bought it. But notice what it quietly concedes, that someone in Lewis's group did the stabbing. Self-defense isn't, we didn't do it. We did it, and we were justified. So even the winning theory in this case points the knives back toward the limo. We'll come back to that. The real killer was an uncharged man who walked away. Here's where it gets genuinely murky. There was at least a couple of men in Lewis's group who fled in that limo and were never traced by police. The defense pointed directly at one of them, Kwame King, whom they nicknamed the Man in Black. They argued King had a large knife, matched witness descriptions, and was the actual killer, and that he conveniently never appeared in any courtroom. Is it possible? Yes. Multiple witnesses described knives in the hands of men who were never charged. The problem is that this theory was also a brilliant defense tactic. If you can wave at a ghost who isn't in the room, you create reasonable doubt for the two men who are. It might be true. It might also be a very convenient empty chair. The honest answer is, we can't rule it out, and we can't confirm it. Ray Lewis personally stabbed someone. This is the version that lives in sports bar arguments and angry comment sections, that Lewis himself wielded a knife. And it's worth being blunt, there's basically no evidence for it. Not one witness across the entire investigation and trial ever put a knife in Ray Lewis's hand. The prosecutor admitted as much in open court. Whatever Lewis did or didn't do that night, the case that he was personally a stabber doesn't hold up, so we set that one aside. It was a random outside attacker. Could some unconnected third party have drifted in out of the crowd and done it? In theory, a packed street at 4 a.m. is chaos, but every account of the fight describes it as two groups who had been arguing, the Ohio men and Lewis's entourage, going at each other. Nobody describes a random stranger. There's no reason to invent one. This one's out. Let's strip this down to what we can actually stand on and then follow it where it goes. We know two young men were stabbed to death in a 90-second street fight. We know that fight was between the Ohio group and Ray Lewis's group, and that, as we've seen, it turned violent when Baker hit Oakley with a bottle. We know the only knives anyone has ever been able to place at the scene were bought days earlier by people in Lewis's party. We know Baker's blood was inside Lewis's limo, and we know the men who fled that scene were Lewis's people, not random strangers. Put that together, and the most likely conclusion is the one the trial itself backed into without ever quite saying out loud. The fatal wounds were inflicted by someone in Lewis's group. That isn't a hot take. It's the quiet premise underneath the self-defense verdict that set everyone free. So who most likely? The evidence points hardest at Joseph Sweeting. He's the one who bought the knives. The wound pattern, deep directed through the heart, fit the large hunting knife he'd purchased far better than the small 2-inch folding knife police actually found at the scene, which had no blood and no fingerprints on it. A bodyguard described one of the attackers as having braids. Sweeting was the man in the group with braids. And most damning of all, Lewis testified that after the fight, he demanded to know what had happened, and Sweeting showed him a knife, made a stabbing, punching motion with it, and said, "Every time they hit me, I hit them." Sweeting's own lawyer all but conceded it in closing, arguing that whatever his client did that night was justified. That's not the language of a man arguing his client touched no one. Reginald Oakley was clearly in the thick of it too. Witnesses had him punching Baker repeatedly, but the evidence he personally used a blade is thinner. He may have, we don't know. Which brings us to Ray Lewis, and the question everyone actually wants answered. The most likely version of his role isn't the villain or the innocent. It's something more uncomfortable than either. Early in the confrontation, more than one witness described him trying to calm things down. One saw him cock a fist, but couldn't say if he ever threw it. He almost certainly did not stab anyone. But the moment the bodies hit the pavement, his instinct wasn't to help or to talk to police. It was to protect himself. He told the car to stay quiet. He misled investigators. His suit vanished. And that's the real heart of it. Lewis's most provable crime that night wasn't violence. It was the cover-up. Under Georgia law, if prosecutors could have proven he took part in the assault as part of the group, he could have been convicted of murder without ever holding a knife. They couldn't prove it, but the cover-up he admitted to is exactly the kind of thing a person does when they'd rather the truth stay buried, whether to hide their own role or to protect the friends who did it. So why did nobody go down for two killings that pretty clearly came from inside that limo? Not because the evidence exonerated everyone. because the case was botched. Atlanta was under enormous pressure to charge fast, and the indictment came in 11 days, before investigators had even tracked down everyone in the limo. The charging documents were written so narrowly that prosecutors had to prove each defendant personally wielded a knife, instead of arguing the simpler truth. It was the pack that did this. Then the witnesses fell apart on the stand. One woman who told police Sweeting showed up at her hotel covered in blood recanted the night before she was due to testify. The district attorney hadn't tried a case in years and was outgunned by one of the best defense teams money could assemble. Then came the move that ended it. Mid-trial, the prosecution was so worried the whole case was about to be thrown out that they cut a deal with Lewis, drop his murder charges, and in exchange he'd plead guilty to a misdemeanor, obstruction of justice, and testify against Oakley and Sweeting. Lewis took it, but on the stand, his testimony gave the jury almost nothing new to convict with. Days later, Oakley and Sweeting were acquitted on every count. The jury was out less than 5 hours. The grim irony, as Oakley's own lawyer pointed out afterward, is that the only person convicted of anything in the deaths of Richard Lawler and Jacynth Baker was Ray Lewis, and only of obstruction. A year of probation, a $250,000 NFL fine, the largest of its kind at the time, and then a Super Bowl MVP trophy 12 months later, and a bust in Canton, Ohio, the same state Lawler and Baker came from. So what most likely happened is this. In a drunken 90-second brawl that Baker helped ignite, one or more men in Ray Lewis's group, most probably Joseph Sweeting, stabbed Richard Lawler and Jacynth Baker to death. Lewis most likely didn't hold a knife, but he made a choice in the minutes and weeks afterward to shield whoever did, including himself, and a rushed, mishandled prosecution did the rest. The murders are, to this day, officially unsolved. 2 families never got an answer, and the man at the center of it has spent 25 years declining to give one. When NPR asked him about it years later, Lewis said that there was not 1 inch of evidence on him. When his former teammate gently asked what he'd say to the victims' families before a Super Bowl, Lewis answered that God doesn't make mistakes. And when a reporter approached him at his Hall of Fame induction, standing a few hundred miles from where Lawler and Baker grew up, he said 4 words. Respectfully, this is my space. Richard Lawler's aunt remembers a different detail. She can still picture the cream-colored sweater her nephew was wearing the night he died, the one stained with his blood. Ray Lewis's kids got to see their daddy every day. Lawler's fiancée once said, "My baby will never get to see her daddy." So I'll throw it to you. Do you think Lewis was a bystander who panicked and protected his friends? Or do you think he knows far more than he's ever admitted? And do you buy that Sweeting was most likely the one with the knife? Or do you lean toward the man who was never charged? Let me know down in the comments, because this is one of those cases where reasonable people land in very different places. Oh, and don't forget free cash. My link's in the description. You get $10 on your first offer. Go grab it.